Yeah.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to welcome all of you to another enriching session of the ICS's weekly Wednesday seminars. My name is Akshat, and I am a research assistant at the ICS. I have the honor of serving as the MC for today's session. The title for today's seminar is The Silk Road Economic Belt to Community with a Shared Future for Mankind, Deciphering Xi Jinping's Worldview. Since becoming the president of the People's Republic of China in 2013, Xi Jinping has pursued a China-centric world order through initiatives such as the Belt and Road Initiative. He has championed economic globalization while curbing the influence of major private players. Post-COVID-19, Xi expanded China's role, proposing developmental, security, and civilizational initiatives aiming to establish China as a leader in the emerging world order, challenging the Western-led rules-based order currently in existence. Understanding Xi Jinping's evolving worldview over the last decade is crucial for assessing its implications for the future of the world. The speaker for today's seminar is Dr. Parimal Maya Sudhakar, Associate Professor and Associate Dean, External Relations at the MIT School of Government. He has completed his Master's, MPhil, and PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. His PhD thesis was titled State and Society Relations in China in the Context of Globalization, 1989 to 2004. The chair for today's seminar is Dr. Jabin T. Jacob, Associate Professor at the Department of International Relations and Governance Studies and Director, Center of Excellence for Himalayan Studies, Shiv Nadar Institution of Eminence, Delhi NCR. He is also an honorary fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, adjunct research fellow at the National Maritime Foundation, and visiting faculty at the Naval War College, Goa. His research interests include Chinese domestic politics, China in South Asia and the Indian Ocean region, Sino-Indian border areas, Indian and Chinese worldviews, and center-province relations in China. His recent publications include China's Search for National Rejuvenation, Domestic and Foreign Policies under Xi Jinping, published in 2020, and How China Engages South Asia, Themes, Partners, and Tools, published in 2023. Before I hand over the session to the chair, I would like to request all participants to follow a few housekeeping rules. All participants shall remain muted during the presentation. Questions may be posted in the chat box during the seminar. Alternatively, you may use the raise your hand option during the interactive session. You will be called upon to unmute yourself and ask your question. We request you to please mention your name and designation while asking your questions. I now hand over the floor to Dr. Jacob. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Akshat. So I'm happy to be here, and it's a particular pleasure to be chairing this session where my classmate and friend of many years, Parimal, is actually speaking. Parimal, I think what is very important about Parimal's work in the China studies field is that he communicates a great deal in Marathi, and in Hindi. He writes in Marathi, in the Marathi press. He's actually published a book in Marathi on Indian foreign policy. And so I think it's a very important service that he's engaged in, that he's communicating about China or on China to a wider audience than just the English-speaking audience in Delhi. And of course, he does his work from Pune, where he teaches, and therefore, the China community actually is also quite substantial now, increasingly outside of Delhi, because of the work of people like Parimal. And so, let me, without any further ado, hand over to Parimal on this subject of the Belt and Road. Now, obviously, it's been 10 years of the Belt and Road Initiative, and there's already been a great deal of analysis. But I think we can still make the mistake of assuming that the Belt and Road is an infrastructure project, an economic development project. It is a foreign policy or a strategic project. I mean, but what is strategic about the Belt and Road is really the question at hand. And I think Parimal has his own perspective on this issue. And so over to you, Parimal. And so maybe about 25 minutes, and then we can take questions and answers at the end. So I'd invite all the participants to please, put your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A box, and then I'll sort of summarize them and put it to the speaker after the presentation. Over to you, Parimal.
Thank you, Jabin, for all the kind words. Thank you, Akshat, for opening this meeting. And thanks to Dr. Alka. I'm speaking from the platform of the ICS in the Wednesday seminar. And really a special gratitude to the Institute of Chinese Studies for all the Wednesday seminars, all other programs, conferences that are being organized by ICS that keep people like us who are away from Delhi connected somehow to the China studies. And this is certainly helping in terms of spreading the group of China watchers and people who are interested in China studies. So thank you once again. Now, let me begin my thoughts on how Xi Jinping is viewing the world, how it is developing, based on how I could interpret Xi Jinping's thought. Now, we all would agree that Xi, after assuming the charge of General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party in 2012, brought in a fundamental shift in China's foreign policy. The Chinese foreign policy has shifted itself from keeping a low profile to what General Secretary Xi called as striving for achievements. While Xi is duly credited for this shift, even prior to him assuming the highest offices, there was a debate within Chinese intelligentsia on the viability of Deng Xiaoping's policy of keeping a low profile. Two events particularly related to China, but undertaken by China's long-standing rivals, Japan and United States, during Hu Jintao's second tenure, that have contributed largely to emergence of this debate. The then Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was at his nationalist base during that period and had visited a war shrine in Japan that had enraged China. It was coincided with Japan declaring nationalization of 3 of many disputed islands between China and Japan. Around the same time, the then US President Barack Obama has declared a pivot to Asia policy to address the China threat. And this again was coincided with his first foreign tour to the ASEAN countries after his re-election. The issue at the center of the debate within Chinese intelligentsia was that keeping the low profile has successfully created a favorable international environment for China's economic development. But perception of the major powers vis-a-vis China has not changed. The debate was boosted by 3 additional factors that demonstrated Chinese growing economic power and influence. The first one was conduct of the Olympics in 2008. Second was agility of Chinese economy during the global financial meltdown of 2008-9. And third, Chinese economy surpassing the Japanese economy to become number 2 in the world. It also needs to be acknowledged that while the debate was there within Chinese intelligentsia, not a major sections within intelligentsia and almost no one from the political establishments were questioning the viability of Deng Xiaoping's keeping low profile policy. Hence, Xi Jinping deserves a credit for smoothly ensuring a change in Chinese strategy from keeping a low profile to striving for achievements, whether for good or for bad. This particular change is based on Xi Jinping's own analysis of the world and analysis of China and his assessment of windows of opportunities for China in the contemporary world. After assuming the charge of General Secretary of the CCP and afterwards as a President of PRC, Xi has categorized China as a major country in world diplomacy, which implies that the international relations cannot take place by excluding China, and also that China is now forthcoming and willing to take initiatives to address interstate, regional, and global issues. Now, prior to Xi's presidency, China had termed its diplomatic engagement with big and powerful countries as China's major country diplomacy. Now, Xi has turned it upside down to indicate that China itself is a major power. And the major power diplomacy of China includes its dealings of big and powerful countries on the one hand and small and less powerful countries on the other hand. She also consciously underplayed the Chinese rhetoric of it being a developing or even rapidly developing country, which was a common term used for China by the Chinese leaders prior to Xi. Although she also did not portray China as a fully developed country. At the same time, he saw that no other country is developing with the speed of China, even in the days of slower economic growth in China. And this overall moment is termed as China's rejuvenation. The national rejuvenation of China is now generally referred to bringing back China's historical international status as the world's most advanced state during the 7th century or from the 7th to 10th century AD. And in the 21st century, it also means Chinese movement of catching up with the sole superpower in the post-Cold War world, that is the United States, in terms of comprehensive national powers. This has made Xi Jinping to introduce a new primary objective of Chinese foreign policy, which is to work towards China's national rejuvenation in a concerted manner. Now, China's national rejuvenation was not only linked to overall domestic development, but foreign policy, China's external engagements were considered as crucial to ensure China's national rejuvenation. Now, prior to Xi, the primary objective of Chinese foreign policy was to harness the external relations for its economic growth and development. Now, as per Xi's own thinking, China has gathered so much of resources and finances that its foreign policy can go beyond serving its own economic interests, and it can now serve the cause of economic development of other countries. Thus, it is not surprising that the Belt and Road Initiative was launched and became the signature foreign policy initiative of Xi regime in last 10.5 years. Now, in order to orient the Chinese foreign affairs establishment to how Xi Jinping saw the world and what he wanted to achieve for China, the CCP has compiled a document named as Xi Jinping Thought on Diplomacy. It's a bulky document, but the crux of Xi Jinping Thought on Diplomacy is very simple. The first major point it underlines is that all the Chinese diplomats, they must link China's foreign policy to achieve China's national rejuvenation. The second and equally important point is that Chinese diplomats or Chinese diplomacy to follow the core leadership rather than what was the system in China prior to Xi as a collective leadership of the party. Thus, the core leadership principle was given prominence even in the diplomatic sphere. Thirdly, the integrated strategy under the leadership of the party, that is the CCP as an overarching institution, was underlined, and diplomats were asked to follow CCP ideology, strategy, and tactics. And thus, it was once again ensured that CCP would be supreme even in terms of defining China's national interest and carrying out its foreign policy objectives in day-to-day foreign policy matters. Fourth, the Chinese diplomats were asked to promote Chinese image in foreign lands with three particular angles. The first one, China as an ancient civilization, a continuous civilization full of wisdom. This Chinese image, it should be promoted and projected everywhere in the world. Second, China open to globalization and also promoting inclusive globalization. And the third one, China as a non-hegemonic country. China as a major country, but a non-hegemonic country. So the Xi Jinping thoughts on diplomacy, they basically wanted Chinese diplomats to work in this particular framework. Following him, the party and promoting Chinese civilization and China's image as open to globalization and a non-hegemonic country in the 21st century. Now, overall, in Xi's worldview, in international relations, three units are highly important for their analysis and actions at their own level. The first unit is China itself. The second is Asia. And the third is the global balance of power. She views that China still faces threat in terms of violation of its sovereignty. And on that count, Xi's views are not different from his predecessors, from Mao to Hu Jintao. And he also vehemently defended China's sovereignty in international relations. However, there are two subtle but important changes from earlier leaders to Xi's rhetoric that one can notice as it developed in last 10 years. First, compared to his predecessors, Xi Jinping emphasizes less on the trauma of sufferings of foreign domination during the century of humiliation. Now, his emphasis is more on China regaining its place in the world. The process is already underway. And the second change is in terms of Chinese assertion of its sovereignty over Tibet, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Taiwan, as well as over the disputed territories in the Himalayas and in the South China Sea and East China Sea. Not merely in rhetoric, but in the form of various active interventions or threats of active interventions. She wants China to take initiatives to shape its external environment in a favorable direction. And Xi himself believes that this assertion of Chinese sovereignty on all these issues would shape the external environment in the long term to favor China. According to Xi's thought process, Chinese diplomacy has to keep the big picture in mind. And he interpreted the big picture as to strive for favorable external environment for national rejuvenation. Now, it was also understood that for China, it was comparatively easy to maintain a peaceful environment for economic development. But it is certainly difficult to shape a favorable international environment for national rejuvenation. And for that, new terms, new projections, new projects, new institutions, all of them are required. Earlier, for the sake of economic development, China has not tried to achieve its core interests. China was more into protecting its core interests, but not in terms of fully achieving its core interests. Rather, China focused more on adapting itself to the changes as happened in the external conditions, such as the changes that happened after the Cold War or after the 9/11 attacks, etc. Now, according to Xi, this approach has not created much favorable environment for promotion of China's core interests. They remained at the level where they were few decades back. Xi Jinping believed that now, under his leadership, the time has come for China to actively shape the external situation for the sake of favorable international environment for its national rejuvenation. This is how, according to me, Xi Jinping, he views China and China's international relations under him. Now, the second important unit for Xi for analysis and action is Asia. And she views Asia as full of potentials to emerge as a cohesive unit based on principles of non-interventions and non-interferences in internal matters of each other, and also practicing cooperation in all the sectors forged together by China and led by China. And in such an Asia, the role and need of the US is minimal, or rather it has become completely obsolete now. On the other hand, she also views that presence of US in Asia, particularly in East Asia and West Asia, is the biggest hurdle in the realization of a cohesive and cooperative Asia. She views that it's the US presence in Asia where the issues involving China are there, such as Hong Kong, Taiwan, or South China Sea, etc. Those issues remain unresolved because of the US presence, but this situation would not continue for long. And as per Xi's worldview, the time has now come for resolution of these issues, most of which constitute as China's core interests. And this is going to happen with realization by Chinese neighbors about the increasing power gap between them and China. Now, earlier period, the US was able to fill in this deficit as China was not modernized. Now, with ever increasing capabilities of China, the US will not be able to sustain its pivot to Asia. And therefore, Xi Jinping is believed to be more confident about China's increasing spheres of influences in Asia, particularly with emergence of Central Asia and the emerging curve of Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq as two concrete spheres of influences for China in Asia. Also, he considers that China is now more confident of handling and managing the situation in East Asia, more confident of containing India in South Asia and in the Indian Ocean, and also more confident about porting the countries of Southeast Asia and countries in the Indian Ocean to link all the Chinese projects to these areas. In addition to all of this, Xi Jinping also considers that China is now poised to play a steering role in mitigating the conflicts in West Asia, mainly because the US has been unable to ensure peace in the region, and this inability of US is resulting into waning, declining of US hegemony in West Asia. Thus, Asia is the most important unit of analysis and action for Xi Jinping. It's therefore not surprising that Xi Jinping has announced his major foreign policy initiatives first for the Asian countries, be it the Silk Road or establishing the community with shared destiny, and later on they were extended to the entire world. Now, the third important unit of analysis for Xi is the balance of power in today's world. According to Xi, there are four key players that are steering the international relations at the global level: US, China, EU, and Russia. Thus, this is the multipolar world, but this multipolar world is now recentering around China, as China is the only major power with deep engagements with the other three poles. Even when there are problems and serious problems between US and China, but the engagement remains more or less quite serious and deep in many sectors. And therefore, Xi Jinping views this overall global situation as favorable to Chinese rejuvenation because of three factors. One, now Russia is banking on its alliance with China. Second, European Union and many countries within European Union are continuing to do business with China. And third, US is still in search of a better strategy to contain both China and Russia. And therefore, Xi Jinping believes that whatever China wants to achieve, this is the right time for China to advance its interests, particularly core interests in the world. Now, it is also tempting to make a comparison of Xi Jinping's outlook with Mao's three-world outlook. If we would try to fit in Xi Jinping's outlook into Mao's three-world, we could say that according to Xi Jinping, today only US constitutes the first world, and China is rapidly catching up with the US. Thus, China is making a move from the second world to the first world, and it is in the phase of transition. The second world is constituted by EU, Russia, and Japan, while countries like India, Indonesia, Brazil, they are in a transition phase from third world to the second world. And the third world is constituted by rest of the countries. This is how, if we would like to put Xi Jinping's outlook into Mao's shoes, this is how we could see the world from his prism. This global power structure, according to Xi, is firming up as a multipolar and multi-layer, with China's extensive engagements with all the poles and with all the layers. These engagements are now concretized by Xi Jinping through three major initiatives: development initiative, security initiative, and civilization initiative. Now, these three initiatives, and predecessor to it was BRI, and what is accompanying to it is wisdom of ancient civilization, that according to Xi will lead the world towards establishing a community with shared destinies. Now, due to Xi Jinping's constant emphasis on Chinese civilization, his global civilization initiative has become a matter of utmost inquiry. The Global Civilization Initiative was rolled out by Xi Jinping in a conference of political parties of the world and not on the forum of United Nations or any other multilateral international organization. Thus, it was not addressed to the heads of states or governments, but to the heads or representatives of political parties. Now, two things could be inferred from this. One, China is attempting to have conversation with wider sections of society in each country rather than merely with the government of each country. Second, China is showing that their relations with different countries are not because of the preference of the ruling party alone, but it has bipartisan or multi-partisan support in many countries. The concept of global civilization is, we could say that it is an articulation of the notion of China as a middle kingdom. But the important differentiation is that now GCI as a notion is without a belief that the world outside China is semi-barbaric or barbaric. Through GCI, Xi Jinping is accepting that not only the Chinese civilization, but other civilizations were also important. And as she said in his speech, all civilizations created by human society are splendid. They, transcending time and space, have jointly made important contribution to humanity's modernization process. He also said that a single flower does not make spring. That is, China would not make a spring. A single flower does not make spring, while 100 flowers in full blossom bring spring to the garden. Now, while Xi Jinping is trying to give a message that other civilizations also contributed and are important or very important, but throughout his outlining of the Global Civilization Initiative, President Xi Jinping had boasted about China's successes, and that implicitly meant that no other country is as successful as China in advancing the development, modernization, and prosperity of its people while maintaining continuity in its civilization. Thus, the civilization initiative is about Chinese civilization in the lead and guiding the other civilizations in uplifting them to a common acceptable level. This common acceptable level would be what he is now calling as a shared future or a shared destiny. Xi Jinping has framed, or it could be said that he has framed the civilization initiative as an alternative to the Western liberalism, also as an alternative to Huntington's Clash of Civilizations. And in India's context or in the South Asian context, we can say that it is also as an alternative or rather an attempt to overcome India's narrative of building a new world order. Now, the Western liberalism, more specifically the Republican liberalism, advocates use of all means in the name of liberal principles of democracy, free trade, and human rights. However, Xi Jinping claims that civilization initiative of China is standing against it. The overall approach of GCI is not very different from liberalism per se, wherein it is propagating global governance through BRI, GDI, GSI, but Xi Jinping is not agreeing to this particular point. But we could certainly say that the approach of GCI is closer to the framework of institutional liberalism. The Global Civilization Initiative is also posed vis-a-vis Huntington's Clash of Civilization, as Xi Jinping's Civilization Initiative talks about not about the clash, but about exchanges, mutual learnings, and cooperation. However, Xi Jinping has not mentioned that vis-a-vis which civilizations he would like to conduct these exchanges or which civilizations would engage in cooperation. So there is no mention of which all civilizations are in existence or which civilization China is acknowledging. The Chinese Academy of Social Sciences has come out with a detailed analysis of Xi Jinping's speech and about the Global Civilization Initiative. But this paper by CASS also did not elaborate upon the existing civilizations, their history, etc. also. And therefore, it looks like that Xi Jinping has left it to each country to decide which civilization they belong to. And there is a constraint on China as well, whether they would accept Japan as belonging to a different civilization, whether they would accept Korea belonging to a different civilization, whether they would accept Mongolia belonging to a different civilization. And therefore, it looks like Xi Jinping has not gone into that particular realm. Although the CAS paper has passingly mentioned three civilizations: the Chinese civilization, Asian civilization, and the Western civilization. And talking about the past, it also mentioned about Indian and South Asian civilization. The global civilization is not explicitly, but thus in a very subtle way, it is an attempt to overcome or to undermine India's legacy of providing an alternative to Western-led world order. When India became independent, the overwhelming sentiments amongst Indian elites was that it was a humongous moment of a birth of a nation deeply rooted in ancient civilization, with its tremendous flexibility to not only accommodate but ensure blossoming of different cultures of different ethnicities and languages. This flexibility ensures continuity in Indian civilization that China is not acknowledging explicitly today. Now, this new nation of India, it was posed to reclaim its rightful place amongst the Committee of Nations with the desire to play a leading role in establishing world peace, ensuring equality amongst all nations, leading the decolonization process, and uplifting humanity out of hunger, poverty, and illiteracy. Now, what India intended to do 75 years ago, today, through the Civilization Initiative, Xi Jinping is trying to reclaim that position, reclaim that claim. That it is China that would bring peace. It is China that would ensure equality amongst nations. It is China that would work against hegemony in the world and would also uplift humanity out of hunger, poverty, and would lead it towards peace and prosperity. A major difference in the Indian approach of the past and the Chinese approach of today is that India always framed its approach in the framework of the nations or the nation states and considered nation as the main actor in international relations. Now, China, through its announcement of the Global Civilization Initiative, is hinting that along with the nation or the nation states, civilization also would be an equally important and additional unit in international relations. This is something that brings in a lot of uncertainty about the Chinese approach to how exactly China would like to go ahead with its three initiatives and in terms of establishing the community with shared future or shared destinies. But overall, through all these initiatives, what Xi Jinping is trying to say to the world, or the message that, or with which he is trying to lure the world, is that polarization and new Cold War, they must be avoided in today's context, and there is no place for zero-sum game, and there is all the possibilities of creating win-win scenario. Also, that China will not be the hegemonic power, will not tread the old path of colonization and plunder. And also that China is emphasizing through its Global Civilization Initiative that each country, they can choose the path of modernization. And China is willing to share its experiences on the path of modernization. But at the same time, China or Xi Jinping is insisting that all the countries must undertake modernization without uprooting their essential culture or fine elements in their traditions, etc. Now, this emphasis on undertaking modernization, it also indicates that somewhere China is trying to justify the failures of BRI in countries like Pakistan or Sri Lanka, wherein China is now trying, Xi Jinping is now trying to say that BRI is not so much a success in some parts because those countries, societies, and economies are not modernized and also not undertaking modernization. And thus, this also is saving face for the for the Xi Jinping with the 10.5 years of the BRI, and its success is not so open or so. Now, along with the GCI, in the overall world outlook of the Xi Jinping, there are blatant contradictions. And by underlining these contradictions, I would like to close this presentation. The first and foremost problem in Xi Jinping's understanding is how to measure Chinese rejuvenation and whether it has really taken place, whether Chinese rejuvenation has really taken place, and how would we measure it. In fact, the recent acceptance by Xi himself about the hardship being faced by some people, that is unprecedented for him. And it indicates that all is not well. Rather, it indicates that China is still on the shaky ground in terms of its economic growth and development. Now, this was what precisely the intelligentsia and many within political establishment, they were arguing when prior to Xi, the debate was going on in China on the keeping the low profile strategy. And they were arguing that Chinese economic growth is still, it is not completely achieved. It is still on the shaky ground and it will take many more years. And therefore, we should keep on having the keeping the low profile strategy. But Xi Jinping has done exactly the opposite of it. The second contradiction in how the Xi sees the world is that Chinese assertiveness has not created a favorable environment for China vis-a-vis important countries such as India, Japan, Australia, Italy in Europe, or the United States, wherein the shift was justified in the name of creating favorable environment for China. Now, the third contradiction could be, or the third problematic issue in Xi's understanding is, can it really be ascertained that US is a declining power? In a sense that Great Britain reduced to merely being a power from the great power status after the Second World War. Or same happened to Russia after the collapse of the USSR. Now, the US is not anywhere near to it as of now, unless some unforeseen changes would unfold and that would bring down the US political and economic system also. Lastly and finally, how much one can guarantee the durability of the party as the supreme authority under the core leader. She has made a definite shift from collective leadership principle within the CCP to the core leadership principle. And according to Xi, this is working fine. But how exactly the transition of leadership would take place next, that is completely uncertain. Also, it is really not clear how exactly different power groups, different interest groups within Chinese society, they are making their case within the Chinese Communist Party and are having some say in the decision making. And therefore, overall, if not immediately, but certainly after Xi Jinping, it is not clear what would be the future of the CCP. And if there is no certainty about it, then the entire worldview of Xi Jinping would come under question, where in this worldview he is keeping China at the center of the global. If it is not at the center currently, but sooner than later, it is going to be at the center of the globe. It is going to be at the center of the international relations. And as we know in international relations, if center would collapse, then there would be chaos, anarchy, and instability everywhere in the world. Thus, if this change, this transition is happening, even if as per Xi Jinping's dream, the transition is happening, how sustainable it would be and whether the future of the world really would be bright under that is something that is certainly questionable in the Xi's development of the world outlook. Thank you.
Thank you, Parimal. Thank you. That was concise and comprehensive at the same time. I think it was a masterful summary of what Xi Jinping has been trying to do since taking over as General Secretary of the Communist Party of China. And I think the way I think two things stood out for me. One, of course, was the attempt to bring in a degree of comparison with India. And the second, these outlining of these contradictions. I think both will have I mean, I certainly have a bunch of questions, but let me first open the floor to the audience. And I'd like to invite the director, ICS, Professor Alka Acharya, to ask the first question. She's been our teacher, so I guess she, has dibs on this. Over to you.
Okay, thanks, Japan. So Parimal, yes, I'd like to really echo Japan's endorsement of, the conciseness as well as the comprehensiveness about your. It was very neatly structured, and I was enjoying the way in which you were taking us from one level to the next to the next. The JNU training really shows very well. So it was a delight listening to it. I want to take you, and my handle will be more from back to the JNU kind of issues, in the sense that I would like to bring in the role of ideology here and ask you two questions about it. Okay. Now, one is that it was conspicuous by its absence, the ideological dimension, which means what? Two things. Are we looking at, there was a debate sometime in the 90s when China had started its reforms, about how this would be a transition to a post-socialist and then, of course, a post-communist, and the Communist Party would morph into something like the liberal democratic parties in Europe or something. And you yourself, when you put the BRI in some kind of a liberal institutionalist mold, you seem to be hinting that something of a transition is taking place ideologically within the party. And yet, we have seen how Xi Jinping has been trying to bring back the flavor of Maoism. So you brought that in also by talking about the three worlds, except that when you put this entire framework and tried to look whether it corresponded to three worlds, it was again completely shorn of any ideological assessment of the first, second, and the third world. I mean, insofar as the developing world is the third world, which it always was. But what distinguishes the first from the second? And it seems to me that you're taking a very power-oriented kind of an approach to the categorization. So my point, therefore, is that is Xi Jinping, by trying to put himself as the core leader, and I completely go along with you in terms of the apprehensions about what happens. You've moved back to this core leader, one leader, and there is nothing on the horizon as to how this change will take place. So where is the role of ideology? You see it in the way in which private enterprise is reined in. You see it in the attacks on the quote-unquote capitalists in China. You see it in tightening of various... is this socialist ideology? Or what is really, therefore, going to be the framework for Xi Jinping in terms of legitimizing CCP rule to achieve this entire grandiose ambitions that you have put forward? So I'll leave it at that. Just your reactions.
Yeah, certainly, I do agree. There's a void of ideology that we could see, and therefore you are quite right that when I posed it, the three world, Xi Jinping's three worlds, it was completely from the power paradigm, and not from any ideological perspective. Now, what Xi Jinping is trying to do is, in my opinion, he is trying to assert party supremacy without bringing in any ideological content in that. So the apprehension for him was that the economic growth and the economic growth would ultimately that paradigm compelled China or forced China towards BRI and all such initiatives. That was not only the foreign policy need, but it was more the need of the internal economy as well for China. And if in that overall context, if the party would not assert itself, and also if private entrepreneurs, the private ownership would gain more importance, then that would be collapse of the one party system. I think his understanding or his actions, they are limited to this only and not going into the ideological realms. Again, we could see this in the party reports that he has read, and in that also, in a very generic manner, he has given the tasks that are there ahead for the party, etc. Manoranjan Mohanty has pointed it out in many writings and forums that he is not talking very clearly about the main contradictions that are there in Chinese society. The only contradiction that he talked about was the uneven development and growing aspirations of the people. But why that happened, uneven development, and that he's unable to explain that part. And the same applies to international relations as well, that he is trying to portray that he is not following the realist practices, but at the same time he doesn't want to look like a liberal in international relations. And therefore some of his followers in academia, they are calling it as a moral realism, saying that it is the human authority that he is trying to exert in international relations by increasing China's sphere of influence, etc. or so. And also saying that even Morgenthau talked about moralism in realism in international relations or so, etc. or so. So this is certainly, I agree that this is a great confusion that is there, and there is no clear-cut ideological pathway that we could see in what he's trying to portray. Again, earlier China was not insisting much on other countries following their own system or so, but that is also a subtle change that Xi Jinping has brought in the last Party Congress, wherein he appealed to other countries to get inspired from the Chinese system, from the overall Chinese approaches, etc. or so. But that also he's not seeing it clearly in terms of Marxism, or the country should get inspired by Marxism also. So we could say it's practicing authoritarianism, he's practicing a kind of liberal institutionalism at the global level, but no concrete ideological basis there to what he's trying to do.
Okay, so we have a question from the audience. Imran Akhtar from Afghanistan asks, in what ways does the community with a shared future for mankind reflect Xi Jinping's vision of China's role in shaping the international order?
Yes, Imran, it is basically China is talking in terms of China as a pivot to development first, then China as a pivot to security, but pivot to security not in terms of forging alliances and then giving security to some countries vis-a-vis other countries, but having a comprehensive security approach. That's what China is trying to portray itself. And thirdly, in terms of guiding others on the civilization matters. This is how China is trying to evolve its role vis-a-vis other countries. The problem here is that no major country is buying this, or even countries in China's neighborhood, they are also not buying this. And therefore, the question remains whether all of this is actually being done to keep the Chinese people, Chinese audiences under its influence, or whether there is really a very big content to it that China wants to bring in its foreign policy vis-a-vis all other countries. BRI, we all know that there is certainly there are initiatives and projects, etc. also. But in terms of the civilization initiative, it's not clear what precisely China would do vis-a-vis other countries.
Thank you. Anand Krishnan. Okay. Anand asked. Okay. Maybe as before Anand, as we wait for Anand. So, I think one of the advantages that I have as a chair is that, I can set the pace on the questions, and I can sort of, okay, Anand says he's not able to.
Okay, I'm able to
All right. Okay,
there
go
was
ahead,
an
Anand.
issue about unmuting. So thank you.
Yeah.
So thank you for that concise and yes, as a very comprehensive presentation, Parimal. In fact, I was just reminded of the your presentation at the India Forum on China in December, where you had, of course, that was more precise on the civilization initiative, but it was a little more colorful in terms of how you presented it there, but maybe less colorfully here, but it does have a lot of echoes from that presentation. So a few, in fact, only 2-3 questions. One is in the beginning when you were talking about the fact that this is Xi Jinping is not focusing on some of the negative things which has happened to China. I mean, in terms of using of history. I'm not sure whether that is entirely whether that is correct because there has been also been some events or at least in the way the party and she has been using or been invoking those events to also say that why China needs to push forth or stand stall in terms of or even sometimes even brazenly. So I'm not very sure whether China is not using some of those negative events in its proposition. So maybe that might be something you might want to again relook if that is possible. The second is I missed this in your presentation, but you put these 3 worlds. But where does China fit into this world? Is it part of this transitional world where some like India or Indonesia or Brazil, is it in that transitional phase, or is it like China is also trying to put itself in the third world, or rather in the global south? Because I have this opinion that China seems to be having the best of both the worlds, both in terms of what you call as global north, but it is also trying to be in the global south. So I think it would be good if you see where China fits itself in all these 3 worlds. But the other main question which I wanted to really ask is, yes, there is this civilizational initiative when you're talking about the fact that yes, China is trying to guide. Again, you of course then finally talked about the contradictions of how this is being received. So not just say the big countries like India and Japan, but even some of these other smaller countries, if you go by the experience of the BRI itself, the pushback which is happening even at the level of the people, it's not just the government. And because you mentioned the civilization initiative was proposed to the political parties because it was seen as a signal for the larger people and not just the governments. But there has been a lot of pushback towards China, especially in terms of investments or in terms of its behavior at various parts of what you call as global south. So even amidst all this good talk and all these sugar-coated words, there seems to be still a patron-client relationship which seems to be still there in these articulations, including by Xi Jinping. So how is that going to be done? And if I could also extend that, because then you finally talked about 3 kinds of civilizations, in which the Chinese seems to be having their own civilization, and the rest of the civilizations are either Asian civilizations or say global civilizations. So, for example, how about the Indian civilizations and or some other civilizations? So the competing civilizations. That is what I just wanted to flag. So thank you.
I'm completely agree with you on last 2 points that yes, China is keeping mum on the other competing civilizations, and tactically they are doing it. They are not very explicit about their how they see the civilizations, and also what you mentioned as a backlash on the BRI and all. Yes, it's there, and I consider that that's mainly because of the raw handling of China of all these projects, or their overall approach is quite straightforward, and they do not bring in the finesse that is required in dealing with different countries, different societies or so. And on that count, basically, the Chinese diplomacy still, they have to learn a lot in terms of dealing with the people in other countries and dealing with the other countries altogether. Also, I would say that the fact that China is under tremendous pressure to gain for itself from the BRI. While BRI is also to influence the other countries and at least on paper saying for the development of those countries, etc. But it also would not like its own economy to be at loss. And therefore, whatever they have invested through a raw mentality, they are trying to extract it. And therefore, that friction is going to happen with those countries, people in those countries, and the society and China on the issue of BRI. So it's not so far it's not a very long drawn or well out strategy on the part of China, wherein it looks like they are not willing to wait for 20, 25, 30 years for their strategic and economic gains out of BRI, but they want it quickly. And that is certainly creating a friction between the less developed countries that are party to BRI and are unable to harness the benefits of BRI so early. And thus, this, in my opinion, this should continue. On where exactly China stand, as I said, China considers that China is basically transiting from the second world to the first world, or it is catching up with the United States, and it is in a phase of transition. But the inevitability is that it will ultimately catch up with the United States, and it will be at par or it will be more powerful than the United States. That's what China itself believes in. So yes, on all these points, I do more or less agree with what you said. And on your first point, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that China is not using those events, but there is a subtle now change in emphasis, because see, if China wants to be leader of the world and it considers that moment has arrived for it to be leader of the world, then it would not be a good tactic or strategy to keep on harping upon the injustices happen to it, but rather it would now project itself as someone that is willing to take the charge and willing to be ahead. So that while the events perhaps would be used more for the domestic audiences, for its own people of the century of humiliation, but outside China would really not like to emphasize much on that, and the emphasis would be more on China's capability to take the international relations in its own hands now. And this is where even China faces a problem in terms of how it projects the world or how it sees the world today. So China is not saying that it's all what's happening in the world is totally wrong, or it's a completely conflict-ridden world or a violent world, etc. Or so. It is simply defining it as an uncertain world. That's all. But if China would say that the outside world or most of the regions in the world, they are conflict ridden, are not making any progress, etc. or so, then obviously the question would arise that if China has become a major power, a major country in 21st century, and if that is not benefiting other countries, other regions, then what is the use of China becoming the major country? Therefore, China now really cannot say that it's all gone case in other regions or outside China or so. So there, Xi Jinping particularly is trying to balance it and trying to say that it is uncertain world, and even though conflicts are there, but that they are manageable. And what is required to manage those conflicts is Xi Jinping's approach. The Chinese approach is required. That's what he's trying to portray.
Thank you, Parimal. And before I move to the next question, I thought that there were a couple of points in Anand's questions that needed re-emphasis. I mean, one, of course, while you said that China's stress on foreign or colonial era depredations is a little less now. I think you're absolutely right in that this is still being used for in the domestic discourse. Domestically, the intent seems to be to keep the Chinese people on alert against foreigners. I mean, you have these campaigns against, so-called foreign spies. Even children are being educated through cartoons. Saying, and the foreign spy is always a white guy, a blonde-haired white guy. So there is a particular conception of the adversary or the foreigner. And there are these national security laws. I mean, in China, the new national security law in China, which seems to give the state more, power to target arbitrarily under the pretext of a legal mechanism, foreigners and foreign interests. So there is that element also that is also there. Maybe it is less in terms of this victimhood narrative, but now it is shifting. Even this is now shifting to a more legalistic approach, that we are now going to target the foreigners on the very ways on the or in the very ways in which the foreigners have usually targeted us, which is on in terms of international law or law and legality or legalese. So that's one. Second, this question of China and its relationship with other civilizations. I think here also, I think you also mentioned this in your presentation, that even though it talks about the world being the single flower not making a garden, so you need these multiple flowers or multiple civilizations. I think even here there is a degree of hierarchization, in the sense that if you now look at statements on India and China, I mean, China clearly cannot say that India is not an ancient civilization or is not a peer civilization, because Buddhism has come from India to China, and so there is that memory always. But what the Chinese have started doing is saying that while both are ancient civilizations, that somewhere along the joint statement or the statement, the Chinese will say China is a civilization more than 5,000 years old. Trying to say that China is somehow older than India, and therefore, because China is older than all of the civilizations, therefore it has a natural weight in international affairs because of this age and so on. So I think at multiple points the Chinese are, while trying to give this impression, if you look more carefully at their language, at what they are saying, they're also trying to make these distinctions. So I think that's something that is important and interesting, that can only be found when you actually look a little deeper. So yeah, I mean, before I ask the next question, let me move to Vishal Chaudhary in the chat box, who's asked, what will be the impact of Chinese assertive leadership on democracies across the globe? Current scenario is one in which we see the rise of strong individuals as leaders, in contrast to traditional Western, amicability, I guess, and family man. So he's basically trying to draw a distinction between how Chinese assertive leadership can actually impact democracies and constitutional systems elsewhere. Yeah.
Well, good. Interesting question, Vishal. I'm not sure how the Chinese leadership would impact leadership in other countries, but certainly one of the elements of emergence of so-called strong leadership in many countries is that this strong leadership can only contain China. Whether it is Japan, India, even in United States, the thing is that these democracies, they can contain force like China only through a strong leadership, and that impact of the rise of China, rise of Chinese power is certainly there on the democracies, wherein somehow they are getting misled by this fact that strong leadership can only counter a strong country. Perhaps that may not be the case, but that's the underlying current in many countries that we could see. So that way, yeah, China as a power is certainly influencing the rise of authoritarian leadership or assertive leadership, or what generally is called as a strong leadership in different countries.
So, Parimal, maybe that's a useful jumping off point to more of a comparison between India and China, perhaps. Now, one of the things that you said that Xi Jinping is doing is talking of national rejuvenation and this idea of major country and small country, right? And if you were to interrogate this idea of national rejuvenation, I was wondering how this compares to what is happening in India. In fact, the foreign minister in his latest book, the Indian foreign minister in his latest book has actually talked about national rejuvenation also in the Indian context, right? And you talk about the community of common destiny. I mean, I think India has now moved from saying Vishwaguru to Vishwamitra. So again, I think these are different ways of saying the same thing, right? Both these countries are, I think, trying to make efforts to portray themselves as not threatening other countries or smaller countries, even though they are bigger countries, but saying that they are friends to the world, that they can share a common path with the rest of the world. And at the same time, every so often, both countries make leaders let slip this attitude that, well, we are a big country and the rest of you are small countries, and therefore big countries have their interests which need to be understood or respected or followed. So how would you look at this India-China comparison using these expressions? These seem to be structural because some of these same expressions, but in different ways, seem to be coming up in both countries.
Yes, sir. But what did you say? Vishwaguru and
Vishwamitra.
Vishwamitra. Okay.
This is a new thing, like Vishwamitra.
Yes, right. Vishwamitra. Mahatma Gandhi used to say not Vishwaguru, Vishwabandhu.
So yeah,
brother of other countries like that. But yes, comparison, I mean, it's a very valid comparison, and whatever the discourse is there in China amongst the Chinese elites and large number of people, we could see same discourse in India and large number of people in India. That the belief in the national rejuvenation, going back to our roots, and then harnessing knowledge from our roots and using it for our economic growth, for our spirituality, etc. So we could see quite a commonality between what the Chinese leadership or the Chinese elites they are doing and what is happening in countries like India. Somehow, I don't know whether we could call it as an epoch in world history, but yes, it is happening at a large scale. And we don't know how exactly would be the repercussions.
All right. And so one follow-up to that is, so I mean, while both countries make these claims about working with the rest of the world, there are, as you pointed out, these contradictions. I mean, Xi Jinping wants to improve China's reputation in the world, but at the same time, his diplomats are encouraged to go into wolf warrior mode, right? So there is a contradiction there. What is your assessment? I mean, do you think that big countries can actually get away with this in this age? I mean, of course, you see that the US as a global hegemon and superpower has gotten away with not matching words with actions, right? So do you think that the Chinese can do the same as the US has done? Or is Xi Jinping actually serious about when he tries to differentiate China from US actions? I think we are big, but we will not be hegemonic. Is that possible, or is it just structural that these countries will inevitably go down this path? That India may be today weaker than China, but inevitably, there is a path that big powers follow, that they can actually ignore these contradictions? Or do you think that smaller powers, they can play the China card or an India card or a US card these days? How do you see this working out? When maybe, I suppose we should maybe center the question on South Asia. What do you think? This competition between India and China in South Asia might actually lead to?
I'm going to jump in here because
Sure.
something which skirts around the kind of issues you raised. On a lighter note, Vishwamitra historically, well, mythologically, is one of the most revered sages. And the status of Vishwamitra was really that of, sageliness. So Very little difference between Vishwaguru and Vishwamitra, except if we want to bifurcate and say Vishwa and Mitra, so to say. But anyway,
Quite, quite.
I think that is the intention, isn't it?
but that is a lighter
Yeah.
note.
Yeah, you're right.
But what struck me is this, that, is there a path, a power trajectory path, which all nations will go through? I mean, that would be the classic realist argument. And a few years back, one had come across this argument. I'm forgetting which context and so on. But the fact that China's rise was somehow giving India the strategic space to grow because it was masking, in one sense, China's rise, India's rise. And so while the attention was focused on China and all the opposition to the way in which China had started to behave and assert itself and so on, well, maybe here is another one in the making. So coming out from what Jabin was saying, that is it the case that eventually even India will come up? Because if you bring in the South Asian question, this whole thing about India being the big brother, or India trying to play a dominant role, or India not wanting anybody in their backyard, as if, this was all Indians big, these are all, parts of the same discourse of power. And therefore, my point is that this would inevitably have some very set answers. It's not going to be, you will have some very specific, and those can be predicted. My point is slightly different, that even as we see reactions to the Chinese, let's say, flexing of muscles, or being more assertive about their claims in the South China Sea, you still see the contrast between the way in which now the notion of global South is actually not so concerned about that as with what they see is the Western hypocrisy, the Western double standards, and how the West is not concerned when other people die or are killed or something. So my point really here is this, that does China really have the kind of bandwidth to project itself as a power that will stand up for this entire lot, which has got no space in the sun under the continuing Western dominance? Yeah.
Very difficult for me to answer.
No, in this, we are just looking at thoughts.
Yeah.
Nobody wants conclusive answers here. This is just a debate, which I
Yeah, right. But compared to India, certainly China's bandwidth is much larger. And also some Chinese strategies are in place, that what exactly they want to do. In my opinion, we are still not evolving our strategies properly. And we also face this issue of what is it? I mean, even if say Vishwaguru or Vishwamitra or whatever, but what is it that we want to do by becoming that? So that question we have not pondered upon. That why to be a global power? That why we want to be a global power? So that is something that unless we answer that, or unless we try to find out many aspects of being a global power and what we can do, then it would give more clarity about what exactly we will do in our neighborhood and in extended neighborhood, etc. Now, China at least has found that they want to have this economic connectedness, all the infrastructural projects using their power, etc. And on that particular path, they are working. So whatever power they have assimilated so far, they are using that power to exert their influence and trying to emerge as a major power. But again, that, as you rightly said, this again is into the limits of the power from the realist prism. Not beyond that. So what Jabin also asked earlier, that whether China also would become a hegemon like the US, or it would really be able to differentiate from the United States, etc. So in that case, we can say that US has differentiated itself from the erstwhile colonial powers. The European colonial powers, they had their colonial dominance in a different way, and US hegemony worked in a different way. So probably Chinese also would have their control or their influence in a different way, not the way the US is doing it currently. And one hint that is emerging is that China would not forge the exclusive military alliances. Without forging exclusive military alliances, it would try to do it. So that perhaps, and through other means, it would try to influence the other countries, leaders, etc. So that may be the case as it would unfold.
Okay, which leads us to another interesting question, which is, the former colonial powers gave way to the US. Eventually, the Chinese hope will eventually give way to the Chinese.
Yeah.
But will the new Chinese model of hegemony have opportunity for other powers to rise, for India to, take over at some stage? So I think the nature of what the Chinese are trying to do, therefore, becomes very crucial to understand. And I think in that sense, this next question that Anand asks, which sort of is related to the question that Professor Acharya asked, which is on the question of this legitimating framework for China inside, domestically. But this domestic legitimating framework is now also has external implications. So what he asks is whether the espousal of development and the emphasis on civilization and culture. Development and civilization and culture both have internal implications as well as external implications. Whether this is a new framework, whether this is an attractive framework both internally as well as externally. So, your thoughts?
See, I mean, the basic contradiction in this approach is just as it is there in the phenomenon of nationalism, that it is inner looking and it is chauvinistic. So as just we discussed about the similarity between India and China. So no matter what you would say, but ultimately it is the civilizational chauvinism that China is asserting. And that's what in India also that is on the rise also. So this is, I don't see much difference between what happened in the past and bringing in civilizational aspects here. It is just that while nationalism emerged in response to colonialism in Asia and in the third world, now because colonialism is not there, so to give legitimacy to nationalism, civilizational aspect is playing a larger role. And nationalism, which was anti-colonial, more anti-colonial earlier, now it is basically packed into parcel into the civilizational package by India, by China. So I don't see it will make much difference.
I think, thank you very much. I think that was an excellent way of putting it. So Anand, we are coming up against Anand's hand has gone up and gone down. All right. I thought that was a very good way of putting it, Parimal, that nationalism is now making a fresh entry under the guise of civilizational heritage or greatness and so on. But that at the heart of it is a degree of parochialism or chauvinism at play. All right, so if we can now return to the very specific issues of the presentation, and because we are coming up against the end of time, just two quick questions or two quick questions. So one is, when you talked about the first contradiction, how do we measure Chinese national rejuvenation? I think this is an important question. But immediately you also said that Xi Jinping made for the first time the reference in his New Year's Eve speech in December that some companies, some enterprises, and some people are also facing hardship. So doesn't that mean that there is some capacity within the Communist Party to measure, if not national rejuvenation, at least national difficulty, right? Otherwise, he would not actually have made this. This is the first time he's making this making such an admission, at least in a New Year's Eve speech, right? because he's talked about the principal contradiction or a new principal contradiction before. So that's one. That fact that he's able to talk about this new principal contradiction or talk about hardship, there is an element capacity to measure. Second, the fourth contradiction, which is can CCP manage the transition, right, from the present core leader to the next core leader? So again, predictions have been made before that, after Deng Xiaoping, who or whether, his successors would be any good, or after Mao, who. So all of this. So, I mean, if you keep that in mind, countries have a way, or political parties have a way of rejuvenation as well, right? Finding new leadership, new ideas. So, so why should the Chinese be glum about it? Say, wondering about what is going to come after Xi, or why should we be, I don't know, hopeful or either way about this? Yeah.
I mean, both I think are interconnected questions, and it is about how the Chinese Communist Party still maintains the organic link with the people and gets get its feedback from the people. And perhaps that is one of the best things about the Chinese Communist Party that has enabled it to keep its hold over power and to some extent also remain popular and acceptable to large number of people in China, because it has this mechanism of taking feedback from people and then working on it. While Xi Jinping has made this public acceptance for the first time of difficulties, but we also should not forget that there was a sudden U-turn on the zero COVID policy and the complete lockdowns. So it was suddenly gone. So that also was based on what the party was experiencing in different parts, particularly in urban areas. The resistance emerging from the people to its strict COVID zero COVID policies or so. So that way, the party still is responsive. The matter of worry is the kind of centralization of power that has happened within Communist Party of China. That is for the first time. While Mao was hugely popular, but he faced tough competition, questions, debates within the party. So as Deng Xiaoping, initially at least for a large period, he indeed had to deal with different factions within the party also. Now, whatever the indications are that those different factions in party, they are now not that vibrant. Of course, I mean, Jabin, you could say that this is how the Chinese Communist Party functions. That at a time the factions become dormant and then they re-emerge again. That may happen, but if that doesn't happen, and this over centralization, if it basically kills the entire the spontaneity of the party in terms of mobilizing or getting the feedback from people and from different sections, then that is more crucial. Your first question is more crucial than the second one, how they would manage the transition. So yes, managing transition is certainly not that difficult, but having this organic link with people, keeping this link with people, and then acting on it, that is something that Communist Party is known for, and they have changed their strategies, tactics accordingly as well. So what we have seen in these two examples of lifting of the zero COVID policy and recent acknowledgement of the hardships are not major things. These are, I would consider these as a small things in terms of getting feedback from the people. But on many other things, we don't know how exactly they are dealing with it.
All right. Thank you, Parimal. I think this was a very interesting discussion. There was a lot of food for thought from your presentation. Once again, compliments on a very organized approach, which allowed us to think things through very carefully and also opens up scope for other pathways of thinking. There was comparison. There was, both the macro picture as well as the micro. And so it remains for me to thank you, Parimal, for joining us, and to thank the ICS for inviting me to chair this session. As Parimal pointed out in the beginning, the ICS does yeoman service by organizing these talks, by doing them online so that we have the greatest number of people able to access these talks, and not just in Delhi, but outside of Delhi. And I think it's clear that there is a distinct Indian perspective on China that is, well, that has always been around, but I think that is only now beginning to get its due, not just abroad, but also sometimes within India. I think Indians themselves are taking some time to understand that there is an Indian perspective possible and available on China, and that this perspective is actually important and more often than not pretty accurate, given our experiences, given our circumstances. I mean, there's a great deal of comparison and insight possible from the Indian vantage point. And I think Parimal's presentation today was an example of that. So thank you all to the audience for your questions, for your attention, and well, until next week then. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jabil. Thank you to welcome you.
Thanks, Parimal. Great session we had today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Jacob, with your permission, shall we bring today's session to a close?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. With this, we come to the end of today's seminar. We thank Dr. Sudhakar and Dr. Jacob for giving us their precious time and gracing us with their presence. The video of today's session will be available on the ICS's YouTube channel. We would also like to invite you to join us for our upcoming Wednesday seminar titled The US-Japan Alliance, Prospects and Challenges under Japan's Recent National Security Strategy, featuring Professor Tomohito Shinoda, Professor, International University of Japan, as the speaker. The ICS conducts regular seminars every week, and information regarding them can be found on our website and social media handles. You may also subscribe to our newsletter for regular updates. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.